Hello, welcome to Turkiye Talks. Today we have a Turkey analyst, Yusuf Erim, who is working at TRT World. Yusuf, welcome to join us. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And Kadir joins us from Washington, D.C. Today we would like to have a debate on the recent diplomatic controversy between Turkey and its allies, I would say, and trade partners. 10 countries, including U.S., Canada, Finland, Sweden, Germany, Denmark, Norway, New Zealand, France, and the Netherlands, ambassadors of these countries came together and they signed a declaration. They signed a letter to Turkey asking for the release of a jailed person who is on trial at the moment. What were the main objective and target of the US and other countries in doing so, Yusuf?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mr. Küçükcan. Thanks for having me, Kadir. I'm very happy to be here now. When we look at this statement released by the 10 ambassadors, they were making a call to Turkey to release a so-called businessman by the name of Osman Kavala. Osman Kavala was been under trial for his role in the 2013 Gezi protests, Gezi uprisings, however you want to call it. Then released, acquitted, and then rearrested on an appeal, and also tying cases into his relations with the Fethullah terror organization as well. So there's an ongoing trial right now. There's actually a court date set for November 26th. So there's an ongoing trial. While this process, this judicial process, this domestic judicial process, very, very important to point that out, because you have a Turkish citizen, crimes committed on Turkish soil, being seen by a Turkish judge. While you have this domestic judicial process, you have 10 ambassadors calling for his release. Now, we've seen ambassadors in the past make calls for the release of Pastor Brunson, make calls for the release of workers at the U.S. consulate. Now, again, I believe those are also interventions in domestic politics, but it gives some room diplomatically for the perpetrator or the defendant in that court case, at least being an American citizen. This is a completely domestic affair. So we're seeing these 10 ambassadors make a statement right in the middle of an ongoing case, almost a month away from a court decision. So we have this. We also have these 10 ambassadors quoting the European Court of Human Rights. Now, the European Court of Human Rights had passed a judgment on Osman Kavala, and these ambassadors felt that by calling for the implementation of the European Court of Human Rights decision, they felt that they could pressure the Turkish government into releasing him. Now, it's important to also look at the European Court of Human Rights decision. Was the European Court of Human Rights within their jurisdiction to pass a decision on Osman Kavala? Well, frankly, when we look at their bylaws, it specifically says that only cases that have exhausted the domestic judicial process can be heard or tried by the European Court of Human Rights. So even a European Court of Human Rights judge, even listening to this case, passing judgment on this case, is a direct violation of its own bylaws. So, of course, when this statement was released, the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, took tremendous offense to it.
Yusuf, before we go on to the reaction of Turkey, can I ask you yet another question regarding the diplomatic traditions, history, etc.? How often such thing happen? 10 ambassadors coming together, signing a letter to a government. Usually diplomats are working behind the scenes. I mean, why they have done this in public this time?
Well, the generally accepted diplomatic correspondence would have been to call the foreign ministry and request audience from the foreign minister and explain their concerns to him. This is what normal diplomats do. Maybe a step further would have been to publicly release a message from a unilateral perspective, but very, very rarely, if ever, I don't even think there might be a historic precedent for 10 ambassadors coming together and releasing this type of joint message. This is quite unheard of, not seen before in Turkey, and it conjures up very, very bad images in the minds of Turks when we see this type of coordination behind the scenes and trying to pressure institutions inside the government. We've seen this in the past as Turks from generals. We've seen this in the past from Turks from other forms of other institutions and other professions. And normally when we see this, this is normally a direct intervention, a non-democratic intervention into the government. So the average Turk, when they see this, it conjures very, very bad memories for them. It's normally traditionally considered domestically an undemocratic move. So when we see 10 ambassadors do this, especially 10 ambassadors to Turkey who should have a good understanding of Turkish cultural life, Turkish society, the way diplomacy works in Turkey, at least they should all have advisors, I assume, that understand this, that would brief the ambassador. It's you look at what type of intent they had in releasing this. Obviously, they wanted to turn this into a public spectacle. That's what they wanted. I assume they were all smart enough to foresee that the Turkish president would have a reaction to this type of statement. I don't think they expected the Turkish president to raise the reaction to the level of persona non grata. I think that surprised them. And I think that's what caused them to take a step back, because they were surprised that the reaction was this strong. But when we look at the past events, as I said, Pastor Brunson, U.S. consulate workers, I think the temperate Turkish reaction to those previous events opened the door to this type of infringement by these 10 ambassadors. Now I think we have a precedent. If you do this, this is going to be the reaction. And I think this type of answer and this type of tough rhetoric will stop this happening from the future. And not only Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but also future administrations of the Turkish government will benefit from this strong reaction.
Yusuf, we will come to the Turkish reaction and how the issue is resolved. But now let me move on to Kadir to ask him how this issue is debated, if it is, of course, in the U.S. Media, in the U.S. Public as well, because it is claimed that this letter or this statement is prepared really under the leadership of U.S. and sent to many other countries maybe, but only 10 of them signed. What is your take on that, Kadir?
Thank you, Talip Hocam. Yes, in the United States, the initial letter did not make it to headlines, I would say, but President Erdogan's reaction, the threat to declare them not persona non grata, were all over the headlines over the weekend. Of course, this came at a critical time in Turkish-American relations. We always talk about these critical turning points in Turkish-American relations, and this is one such time because we are going into G20 summit in Rome, and then there's the Glasgow summit. Turkey very recently submitted a proposal to purchase around 40 F-16s and 80 kind of modernization kits for its existing fleet of F-16s. This is supposed to, according to kind of my analysis, sort of rejuvenate the relations, restart some of the restart repairing some of the defense cooperation that's been not happening. And because we know all that from S-400 issue and Turkey being kicked out of the F-35 program. So Turkey's proposal came very recently, and as Turkish-American sort of relations watchers, we were hoping that this would really be a sort of point that is going to leverage the relationship and then help it sort of get to a better place. Because as you know, right before the pandemic in 2019, we had many crises in Turkish-American relations. So when that made the headlines, President's threat, I think, as Yusuf rightly pointed out, that was seen as like, whoa, what's happening here? But over the weekend, there were diplomatic channels probably, and they came to a resolution where the ambassadors, recommitted themselves to 41st article of the Vienna Convention. So that's good news. The president's office accepted that as a positive sign. Of course, these 10 ambassadors being kicked out of the country would have been a very sort of extreme case of diplomatic breakdown. As you yourself pointed out at the beginning, the coordination among the ambassadors, I think, was really extreme from the Turkish perspective, because that's pretty much unprecedented, as Yusuf said. We have seen in the past statements, public statements from diplomats in Turkey about judicial processes in Turkey, which was met with a strong reaction. And Turks are very, sensitive when it comes to Western comments, Western commentary or criticism about domestic affairs. But
Kadir, can I interrupt you?
Coordination. Sure.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you? I just want to move to Yusuf on this issue, because he lived in the United States for a long time and he's been following the U.S. Foreign policy as well. And here, as you have just said, Western countries, including U.S., they are sometimes using this democracy issue, human rights issue, as a sort of a stick. So you all know that this democracy promotion in the Middle East and elsewhere as well, the US has been following such a policy for some time. But when we look at how that is taking place, let's look at some other countries where there is no democracy, where there is complete authoritarianism. And do you think, Yusuf, that that played a role as well, that the US is now again trying to take this role, because for some time, especially during the Trump administration, there was no such thing. And of course, there is a backfire. And I think, I wonder whether you can also comment on that. If US and it's the group that we have mentioned, the countries, they have predicted that such an outcome or such a strong reaction would come from Turkey.
Well, first of all, there's a big difference in understanding towards how the United States conducts foreign policy from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. Obviously, Trump campaigned under an America First type of understanding, where he looks at bilateral interests, national interests, and has a much more realpolitik understanding towards foreign policy, where he doesn't want to see the United States as the policeman of the world. He wants to see how national interests can be furthered through diplomacy. Then we see Biden come in much more liberal, from a more progressive camp, his team from a much more progressive camp. During his campaigning, obviously there was a very famous interview with the New York Times where he already lashed out at Erdogan while he was still a presidential candidate, threatened him basically through his support behind the opposition. And after he got elected, we saw that the realities of the White House, the realities of Turkey's importance on foreign policy, made Biden take a step back from those words. So we're at a point right now where the Biden administration, again, human rights is a very important part of their agenda, but we're seeing double standards. If human rights are very important, why have we not seen the Biden administration take a tough line against the Saudis on Küçükcan? Why are we seeing the Biden administration greenlight massive arms sales to the UAE? Why are we not seeing Biden take a tougher stance against Russia? There's millions of examples like this. There's many examples of European Court of Human Rights decisions not being implemented. Why are European Court of Human Rights decisions not being implemented in Western Thrace, where Greeks are oppressing the minority groups over there, most namely Turks and other Muslims that like to be called Greek Muslims, but have an ethnicity? And again, when all this is happening, why is Osman Kavala so important? Why does this keep coming up? Why do the United States make this such a important flashpoint in the relationship with Turkey when there's so much to talk about in this relationship? That's always very, very interesting. And I want to touch upon the Turkish reaction a little as well, just a different understanding. We're seeing Turkey right now go through a transformation in its understanding. I don't want to look at this situation with the 10 ambassadors in isolation. I want to look at this as Turkey's understanding of the problem of foreign meddling inside domestic affairs and inside Turkey. You have the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi at the Istanbul consulate. You have the arrests of spies from Iran, UAE, and Israel. You have a social media campaign during the wildfires. You have now these 10 ambassadors. You have the statements from Biden when he was a presidential candidate. We're seeing many clandestine and diplomatic opportunities or initiatives that are targeting Turkey's domestic affairs, and we're seeing Turkey taking a tougher line against all this. So there's a change in Turkey's national security understanding that is adding diplomacy and communications underneath that new umbrella. But this isn't Turkey specific. This is part of a global trend. We're seeing the United States do this, Twitter banning Trump. We're seeing the United States crack down on social media and begin to want to regulate it more. We're seeing the EU do this. So this shouldn't be, oh, why is Turkey doing this? Turkey's just part of a global trend that is now placing communications, the understanding of communications, the integrity of information underneath the national security umbrella. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing with the social media campaign during the wildfires. That's what we're seeing with this foreign meddling into Turkey's domestic affairs. We need to remember that just a year and a half from now, there's going to be elections in Turkey. So there definitely needs to begin some type of monitoring of the type of foreign influence that is going on in this country to begin now, because the last thing Turkey needs is a Russiagate. The last thing Turkey needs is its elections, the integrity of its elections questioned. And if these types of foreign operations, and I'm not calling the 10 ambassador statement an operation, they could have very well had a very good intent. They could have been very naive. Who knows? I don't know what they were thinking. But these types of interventions into domestic affairs, the domestic judicial system, social media operations, these types of things need to be controlled and monitored. We can't have free reign like this. The United States isn't allowing it. The European Union isn't allowing it. Why should Turkey allow it?
Well, thank you, Yusuf. Sure. Okay, Kadir, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to point out, based on what you asked Yusuf and what he said, there are two different dynamics we need to be also thinking about when it comes to these kinds of statements from U.S. officials. One is, when they go back in their careers, when Congress asks them in so-and-so country, what is your record on human rights? They feel like they need to show something concrete. And there's that domestic pressure on American diplomats, actually, to show that they have done something for the improvement of democracy around the world. They took a stance, etc. So that could have been one of the underlying motivations. And then the other thing is, of course, the Biden administration, as Yusuf said, has been inconsistent when it comes to, calling out human rights issues and democracy issues around the world, despite the fact that it came to, Biden administration, when it came to power, it said it would be very transparent with its allies. It would call out, the democratic issues, human rights issues around the world, and it would be very consistent, and it would gather, it would make democracy promotion a concrete part of its foreign policy initiatives, foreign policy overall, because, like Yusuf said, because of the American domestic politics, the Trump era, the questions about American democracy itself. So I think those dynamics also play a role in what happened over the weekend and this week in the form of this controversy over the ambassador's statement.
Kadir, actually, and personally, I would welcome democracy promotion in the world, globally speaking. But if that is targeting only a specific group of nations and countries, that is troubling, as Yusuf said. Why there is a selective purpose, why there is a selective, let's say, objective of certain countries. There are many countries where, there are some problems with democracy in many countries, even U.S. Remember that the guy who remained in the Guantanamo prison for 19 years, he was not tried. He was not put on trial. There was no official, I think, court case, but he was released, and he remained there for 19 years. Can you imagine? I mean, and you can see these self-contradictions within the U.S. Sometimes, if U.S. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I actually wanted to ask you about this, right? In many ways, European courts, you know, they are the ones who have established broad outlines of human rights, you know, conventions and, you know, democratic institutional sort of standards, etc. And from what I see, they are in a crisis of sort of creating a unified front around these values and these institutions themselves. And when they try to preach it elsewhere, it sounds very weak. It falls on deaf ears in many ways. And then, as you pointed out, it's often sort of seen as double standards. But you've spent a lot of time, again, every program I ask you this, with the Europeans. How has it evolved in Europe? Maybe you can comment on that, because some of these signatories, ambassadors, were European, France and Germany and others.
Well, of course, I mean, there is a respect for democracy and human rights, but as you said, I think there are some issues within those countries. And I was a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, where the main theme of the whole debate centers around democracy, human rights, freedom, etc. And a number of decisions are taken, not by the, of course, the recommendations are usually made by the Parliamentary Assembly, and the decisions are made by the European Court of Human Rights. These are working in a sense side by side. And there are many other decisions, as Yusuf has already pointed out. One relates to the Greece and the Western trades, and there are many decisions regarding Russia and many other countries actually, and we don't see any implementation. I mean, they don't do it. And when you look at this scene, actually, I can argue that some countries are picked on by European countries, and Turkey is one of them. Azerbaijan is yet another. So that, I think, is not a balancing act in a sense. When you attack the countries and their constitutions and constitutional institutions, you become defensive. I don't see any constructive debate over there. And when you look at how racism is tackled, how anti-Semitism is tackled, how minorities are tackled in many countries, I think you will agree with me. Secondly, within the European Union itself, let me finish this, Yusuf, it will be very short. And now look at Poland, look at Hungary. I mean, they are in violation of European standards. But what's happening? Just, some empty calls, I would say, diplomatic calls, but nothing further. But when it comes to Turkey, people are even talking about some sanctions in the Council of Europe, because there will be ministers' meetings in very shortly, and they're talking about suspending Turkey's membership. So this is a very, I think, strong statement, strong decision, and Turkey will, of course, react to that, because when you look at Turkish political scene, as Yusuf Erim said, Turkey do not want to see any kind of intervention like any other sovereign nation state. Okay, Yusuf, go ahead. You were going to say something.
To add to what you were saying, I mean, if the United States, the European Union, or any of these countries from the home countries of the 10 ambassadors, they want to have a very frank and healthy discussion about the promotion of democracy or human rights with Turkey, there's many ways to do this. I believe that the Turkish leadership is more than open to any type of constructive criticism, any type of advice, any type of a frank and sincere sit down on this matter. But when you choose confrontational correspondence versus constructional criticism, of course, they're going to be very unhappy. When you try to create a public spectacle, when you try to turn this into a political weapon for one group versus the other, when you try to polarize inside of the country with the certain actions that you're taking, this is going to be viewed as, many countries would view this as a national security threat. I've never seen anything like this in history before. I don't recall a precedent. I know both of you guys are very well-versed students of history. Can you guys remember anything like this before?
Not really. There hasn't been such concerted effort to corner a country. Now, okay, I think we have covered a number of issues, but now let's look at the future a little bit, okay? Luckily, I would say, this tension has been resolved. Ambassadors were not announced as, persona non grata. And I think there was a smooth, transition, I would say. And how that happened, Yusuf, do you think? I mean, do you think we should acknowledge the success of diplomacy here in this very case?
I think all 11 sides wanted a softer ending, a de-escalated ending to this. I think the statement released by the U.S. Embassy and then retweeted by the other 9 embassies provided everyone with a little diplomatic breathing room. And the Turkish president, he's a pragmatic man. If you provide him with the diplomatic space, if you give him an olive branch, he'll take that olive branch and he'll hand you an olive branch back. Now, I think the United States is much better positioned than the other 9 countries because Satterfield has left. He's now the former U.S. ambassador. Jeff Flake is coming in. So they have the added bonus of having new blood, a new face at the embassy. Versus the other 9 countries who still have this ambassadors who are attached to that statement. So those other 9 ambassadors, even though the Turkish government views this as a forgive, I don't think this is something they'll forget. It'll stay in the back of their minds. But as you said, let's look to the future. 2 very important events, the G20, the climate summit in Glasgow. The Turkish president is going to be at the table with many of these countries at the G20 in Rome, discussing the economics of the future, the pandemic, dealing with the pandemic, food security, supply chains, climate change, zero emissions economy. So there's a lot to discuss there. And then, as I said, right after that, meeting in Glasgow again, we're expecting a sit down between Turkish president and his US counterpart, Joe Biden. That's going to be a very, very important sit down because the relationship is really at a crossroads. I know we always say this, but I really think this is the crossroad of crossroads right now, because you have a letter of request for 40 F-16s plus 80 modernization kits. Now, if this letter of request, which as the Turkish president's statements point out, was triggered by American advisement, gets shot down in Congress, I think the confidence that the Turks will have in their relationship with the U.S. will probably be at an all-time low, lower than any other point in U.S.-Turkish history. And at the end of the day, this is not just a matter of Turkish national security. This is a matter of NATO's multilateral security. If you allow the Turkish Air Force to get out of date, this doesn't just impact Turkey. This impacts the whole transatlantic alliance. This impacts the whole southeastern flank of the alliance. We're talking about a time right now where there's Russian separatists in Ukraine, there's Al-Qaeda and Daesh in Syria and Iraq, there's millions of migrants from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, North Africa trying to enter transatlantic soil, and you are trying to take steps to weaken the second largest army and the second best operational capacity inside NATO because of what? A bilateral political spat? This doesn't make sense in the grand strategy and the big picture. And I hope that Biden will be able to convince Congress and the elements inside Congress that have their own anti-Turkey agendas from looking at the big picture and voting for the greater good.
Yusuf, thank you. Now, let me turn to Kadir, because you mentioned 2 issues. One, that the new ambassador will be coming to Turkey very soon. Secondly, the letter that was sent to Blinken. Kadir, can you please tell us first, what is the significance of such letter? I mean, how influential it is, whether it is just a public opinion thing. I mean, what is the significance of it, and how often these letters are really taken seriously? That is my first question. Secondly, the new ambassador, who he is actually, Turkish public opinion is very interested in his position, his connection with the Biden administration. Can you please just explain to us these things?
Well, when it comes to congressional letters, they are important, but of course you have to look at the signatories. If there are foreign relations committee members or leaders of those committees who are signing on to those letters, and how advanced we are in the process of that request, F-16 request. So this letter was very quick, right after F-16 request from Turkey, and it was only signed by 4 House of Representatives. As far as I know, they're not, I would have to double check, I don't trust my memory, but as far as I know, they're not part of the Foreign Relations Committee. So it was and I believe 3 of them have Greek heritage. So the various lobbying groups are active in Congress. They try to undermine any sort of rapprochement with Turkey, and based on the fact that there are existing sanctions on Turkey regarding the S-400s. As I said, this letter, of course, tells you that the lobbying groups will be actively working against this deal in Congress, but the administration have many ways of trying to sell this to Congress, right? It can talk about it can talk about the, excuse me, it talks about the importance of NATO, like Yusuf said, the relationship with Turkey, as also, I'm very sorry, also the fact that this actually benefits U.S. Defense industry, which creates a lot of jobs inside the U.S. So I'm hoping the Biden administration already had advanced talks with Turkey before Turkey submitted this proposal to purchase F-16s, and hopefully they'll be able to convince Congress, and that would be a big boost to the U.S.-Turkey relationship, because it's a $6 billion. It's not a small amount of money, and it reassures an ally, NATO ally, treaty ally. It strengthens NATO. It allows Turkey to maintain its defense capabilities. Turkey has used F-16s very, very effectively over the years. When it comes to the new ambassador, for the first time in a long time, we are going to have political appointees in both capitals. And it's been only, several months, about 6 months since the Turkish ambassador to the U.S. came here, and he's a political appointee. And then Jeff Flake will be heading to Turkey very soon, and he's a political appointee. I think this will also create a positive momentum, because both ambassadors can, they have more leeway in how they handle things. They're former politicians, both of them, and they have access to to both leaders in a way that a career diplomat may not have as much. And Jeff Flake is someone who opposed Trump early on. That's why Biden is kind of rewarding him with this ambassadorship. And Flake has been a respected senator from Arizona, and he doesn't have negative sort of statements about Turkey in his record. If anything, he actually didn't even sign the Armenian resolution. So when you look at his background, I don't expect too many sort of problems that would raise eyebrows in Turkey. But however, the pressures I mentioned earlier, both from Congress and from Biden administration's sort of trying to make democracy part of its foreign policy agenda, those will still play a role, and probably Flake will feel like he needs to say something about those things, especially if he feels like he's not making any headway in his private consultations. But I'm hoping, and I'm almost certain that there will be a new dynamic, because both of these ambassadors are politically appointed and they have access to the leaders.
Yusuf, my last question is to you. We have got only a few minutes. I think you have nicely contextualized the debate and also its relevance to the other issues that you have mentioned. In the Turkish media, it's been reported that F-16 proposal actually came from the U.S. Do you think this is a sign of a, let's say, a new beginning or rapprochement, or as you have just said, some sort of maybe fresh beginning between the two countries?
Well, I think Biden is trying to look at ways to fuel a rapprochement. The Turkish president's given Biden the opportunity to come to the table. I think Turkey was very helpful in Afghanistan and took on a big role and is still taking on a big role. That had provided Biden an opportunity for a rapprochement over there. Again, with the F-16 letter of request, I think this is providing Biden with an opportunity for rapprochement, especially if it came from him. It's something that Biden could go back and say, look, Turkey wants to work with us. It's still committed to U.S. weapons. It's still committed to being part of the NATO defense structure. And I think that's something that he can try to pitch to Congress to try to get this through. When we look at the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, they've been very, very tough on Turkey. Buying F-16s. Now, when we look at the region that Turkey's in, obviously the United States likes to keep a balance between Turkey and other allies that the United States has in the region that are Turkish rivals, like Greece. It might not want to see Turkey get too strong with an F-35 sale, but an F-16 sale would not upset the balance in that region. Again, there's obviously Israel as well. Israel might be concerned seeing Turkey get F-16s, F-35s, but F-16s might be more tolerable for Israel. And at the end of the day, Turkey only needs a stopgap solution. Turkey's working on its own 5th generation indigenous fighter jet, the TFX. They say it's scheduled for 2023. I think let's be a little more realistic and say 2026, 2027, but sooner or later, Turkey's going to have its own jet, so it's not going to have to rely on any foreign sales. But when we look at this sale, it's very important for Turkey, as Mr. Üstün stated. It's a $6 billion sale. Lockheed Martin has production lines in New Jersey. They have production lines in South Carolina and Pennsylvania, Texas. These are all very, very important states, bringing a lot of jobs to these states. Again, there's members on this Foreign Relations Committee are going to want to see these states get these jobs. So I see no reason, despite having certain personal negative views towards Turkey, I see no reason why this shouldn't be blocked. I don't see this type of sale risking the quantitative edge that certain U.S. allies have in the region, want to see that quantitative military edge over Turkey. I don't see that being forfeited with this sale. And it gives Biden a chance to warm the relationship up with Turkey. And hopefully it could be a step in the right direction for both sides, where they get back together, where we see that crossroad turn back into an intersection instead of a deviation.
Well, thank you very much. I think with that, we come to the end of this program. Yusuf, Erim, thank you very much for joining us from TRT World. And I would like to say goodbye to everybody, to you, Kadir, as well. Thank you very much for contributing to this debate. It was lovely to see you here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, goodbye.